There is a number buried inside an old research model that decides, almost mathematically, whether your entire bloodline exists at all. 5. Fewer than 5 people standing between your ancestors and an animal built to kill them, and the researchers who modeled this found the odds simply did not work. 5 or more, and something flips, instantly, inside the predator's own calculation. That number is not a metaphor. It is closer to the actual hinge your entire existence swings on. Forget everything you have ever imagined about ancient humans ruling the savannah. For most of our history, we were not the scary thing in the grass. We were the thing the scary thing in the grass was looking for. Homo habilis, one of our earliest tool-using ancestors, had a brain barely larger than a chimpanzee's. It was not yet in control of its own environment, not even close. Researchers studying fossil assemblages from this period estimate that a striking share of early hominins, by some counts 6 to 10%, died from direct predation rather than starvation, disease, or violence at the hands of other humans. Leopards specifically targeted hominins small enough to drag into cover and feed on undisturbed. Large birds of prey left their own signature behind on bone. And one competitor mattered more than almost any other in this particular story: the giant hyena. Pachycrocuta brevirostris, sometimes called the giant short-faced hyena, was not a scaled-up version of the hyenas alive today. It stood taller at the shoulder than a large modern lion, with a bite designed specifically for cracking open the thick leg bones of elephants and rhinos to reach the marrow inside. For an early hominin, this was not a rival. It was an eviction notice with teeth. So if your ancestors were this outmatched, how are you even here to hear this story? The answer is not strength. It was never strength. It was something far stranger and far more effective: arithmetic. Researchers modeling predator and scavenger competition on the African landscape found a very specific threshold in how these encounters actually played out. Groups of hominins smaller than 5 individuals barely survived scavenging carcasses at all. They could only manage it when giant hyena populations happened to be unusually low and leftovers unusually plentiful. But cross that threshold, just barely, past 5 individuals working together, and everything flipped. Groups larger than 5 did not just survive. Their populations grew at the direct expense of the very predator that should have dominated them completely. An animal that could have effortlessly killed a lone hominin, one at a time, could not handle a crowd standing its ground together. Group living meant more eyes scanning the horizon, more ears catching a rustle in dry grass. It meant more bodies able to scatter suddenly, breaking a predator's focus entirely. It meant enough bodies to actually mob an attacker, turning a single meal into a serious, costly risk. A predator calculates cost against reward instinctively, every single time it chooses to strike. Humans in groups made the cost impossibly high and the reward suddenly uncertain. That single mathematical shift may be the real origin of human cooperation. Not kindness, not morality. Arithmetic, written in the language of survival. The individuals who cooperated lived long enough to pass on whatever made them cooperate. The individuals who wandered off alone simply stopped appearing in the fossil record. Now add a second weapon into this equation, one that changed everything even further: fire. Fire did not start as a cooking tool. That part came later, almost as an afterthought. Its first job was defense. Predators avoid open flame instinctively, almost universally. A burning branch, held at the mouth of a shelter, turned a vulnerable group into a fortified one. At night, when human eyesight is at its weakest, fire became the only real advantage humans had. It also solved a second problem nobody expects: protecting food from being stolen. A large carcass, freshly killed, attracts every scavenger within smelling distance almost immediately. Fire let a group defend that carcass, and later, smoke and dry the meat to preserve it. Meat that used to spoil within a day could now last for weeks, changing the entire survival calculation. One controlled flame did the work of an entire wall, an entire alarm system, and a food locker combined. Now add the third piece: tools, sharpened, shaped, carried, and eventually thrown. Evidence shows early hominins using sticks and stones for defense as far back as 3.5 million years ago. A stick alone will not stop a hyena built to crush bone. But a stick, thrown by 5 coordinated people, changes the odds completely. A sharpened point extends the reach of a human arm just enough to matter in the split second that counts. None of these 3 things, group size, fire, or tools, worked particularly well alone. Together, they formed something predators had never encountered before: an unkillable prey species. Prey that thought ahead, prey that planned, prey that punished attackers instead of only running from them. This is where the story usually gets told wrong, in almost every documentary and textbook. It gets framed as humans conquering nature through brute dominance, early and often. The bones say something else entirely. Dominance came last, not first. For the vast majority of our evolutionary history, we were hunted more than we hunted. Fear came first. Vigilance came first. Cooperation came first, out of necessity, not virtue. And that fear left fingerprints still visible in modern human behavior today. The instinct to check dark corners, the unease of being alone outside at night, the deep, disproportionate fear so many people feel toward large animals, sudden movement in brush, or the sound of something moving just out of sight. Evolutionary psychologists argue these are not irrational anxieties invented recently. They are inherited alarms, tuned over millions of years by ancestors who died when they ignored them. Every person who calmly walked past a real predator without reacting simply did not survive to reproduce. Every person who flinched, who froze, who screamed and ran sometimes did. So the nervous, jumpy ancestor is not the failure of the story. It is the reason the story continues at all. Now think about the psychological weight of living like that every night. For hundreds of thousands of years, position inside a group was not random. The center of a sleeping group was measurably safer than the edge, every single night, because an edge position left a person exposed on one side only. Easier to reach, harder to defend, which meant early humans likely negotiated, however quietly, for a spot closer to the middle of the group. Not out of cruelty, out of the same cold arithmetic that shaped every other survival decision in this story. Sleep itself became a calculated risk, negotiated silently between exhausted, frightened people. And still, the group held together, because the alternative, sleeping alone, was measurably worse. This is the part historians rarely dramatize enough. Survival was not one dramatic battle. It was thousands of ordinary nights, each one slightly less deadly because people stayed close. Multiply that by tens of thousands of generations, and you get modern humans sitting exactly where you are now. Every habit your body still carries, from disliking isolation to craving a lit room at night, traces back here. Even modern children, given no cultural instruction at all, show a fear of the dark by a very young age. Developmental psychologists see this as further evidence that the fear itself is ancient, not learned recently. It did not need to be taught because it was never really invented. It was carried forward, intact. So when you feel that specific unease walking through an unlit parking lot late at night, pause for a second. That is not irrational modern anxiety. That is a message, relayed across 2 million years, still arriving on time. It is the last surviving instruction from every ancestor who did not make it past that exact same feeling. And it explains, more than almost anything else in human psychology, why isolation still feels dangerous today. Not because modern predators are waiting in the dark, because the wiring never fully updated to know that. It simply kept doing the one thing that had worked unfailingly for millions of years before you were ever born. Notice how much of modern life still, quietly, rehearses this exact same arithmetic, even when no predator is anywhere nearby. Children instinctively ask for a nightlight, or a door left open a crack, long before anyone teaches them that darkness is supposed to feel dangerous. Campers, sitting around a fire in the actual wilderness for the first time in years, often report feeling an unease they cannot fully explain until someone jokingly points out there is nothing out there anymore that could actually hurt them. The feeling rarely listens to that reassurance. Horror films exploit this same ancient wiring constantly, and rarely by inventing anything new. The monster in the dark, the character who wanders off from the group and is never seen again, the safety felt only once everyone is back together near the light. None of that was invented by a screenwriter. It was borrowed directly from a survival lesson 2 million years old, repackaged as entertainment. Even modern workplace language echoes it, almost accidentally. People instinctively describe isolation as exposed, describe a supportive team as having your back, describe abandonment as being left out in the cold. These are not random figures of speech. They are fossils, preserved in language instead of stone, from a time when all three phrases were literally, physically true. Now, here comes the twist that changes how this entire narrative should be read. Somewhere between 3 and 1 million years ago, the balance of power began to quietly shift. Bigger brains meant better coordination. Better coordination meant larger, more organized groups. Better tools meant defense could become offense, almost without anyone deciding it should. The same stick that once fended off a hungry hyena could now be sharpened and used to hunt one instead. The same fire that once simply scared predators away could now be used to drive them out of territory entirely. Slowly, the hunted began hunting the things that once hunted them. Archaeological sites even show something remarkable: evidence of early humans directly challenging giant hyenas for carcasses, not just scavenging leftovers quietly, actively contesting a kill with an animal built to dominate that contest. That is an almost unthinkable role reversal, happening in complete silence over hundreds of thousands of years. No single moment marked the shift. No battle was ever won outright in an afternoon. It happened the way most evolutionary victories happen: quietly, generation after generation, unnoticed while it occurred. By the time humans could look back and ask what happened, the predators simply were not winning anymore. Giant hyenas eventually vanished from most of their former range. Leopards still exist, still capable, still occasionally dangerous, but no longer treating humans the way they once treated small, isolated hominins in the dark. The transformation was not physical. Humans did not grow claws or fangs or thicker hides. The transformation was entirely social, entirely cognitive, built from cooperation stacked on cooperation, which means the real ancient weapon was never a spear or even fire. It was the willingness to stand next to another person instead of running alone. 5 individuals, standing together, quietly rewrote the entire food chain over deep time. Consider that the next time you feel a flicker of unease walking somewhere alone in the dark. That feeling is not weakness. It is an alarm system, inherited from ancestors who were once eaten for ignoring it. It kept a fragile, slow, clawless primate alive long enough to eventually dominate an entire planet. Every tool you have ever used traces back to a stick sharpened by someone afraid of being next. Every fire you have ever sat beside traces back to flames held up against the dark out of necessity. Every instinct to stay close to other people traces back to a mathematics problem solved by dying alone. The predators never disappeared entirely on their own. They simply stopped being able to win, and the species that could not fight back with strength won anyway, using something predators never developed: each other. That is the actual ending of this story, the one most retellings skip entirely. Humans did not conquer the food chain by becoming the strongest thing in it. They conquered it by becoming the hardest thing in it to be alone. Public health researchers today describe widespread, chronic loneliness as a measurable risk to physical health, comparable in some studies to smoking a modest number of cigarettes a day. That comparison sounds dramatic, almost exaggerated, until you place it back inside the story this video has been telling from the very beginning. For a creature that survived 2 million years specifically by never being alone long enough for a predator's math to work in its favor, prolonged isolation is not a mild modern inconvenience. It is closer to a return to exactly the condition that used to be fatal. Modern life removed the leopards and the giant hyenas, but it did not remove the underlying wiring that once measured safety by counting how many other people were standing nearby. Where a predator once made isolation dangerous directly, modern isolation seems to make the body behave as though the danger is still there, quietly, without a visible cause. 5 was never just a number in an old research model. It was the smallest size a family could be, and still be a fortress.